All right, this is Think or Be Eaten, and actually in response to a listener who thought that perhaps it might be time for us to do a 101 for 9/11. We haven't dealt with the subject for quite some time. We spent hours and hours with it in the years gone by. But maybe it's just a time to lay some basic facts down for those who perhaps understand that something might have been wrong that day, but of course trust their government implicitly, which obviously we have to say to you right now is a really big mistake, and we'll tell you why. With us is Herb Smith. He and Andy Sr. are the fronts for the Uticans for 9/11 Truth. The website will be attached to this audio, so we won't do that right now. Herb is with us today, and Herb, thanks a lot for coming on, and I appreciate your willingness to do such.
Hey, Viz, thanks for having me on again. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has, and I really think this was a good idea. It was not my own, but that of a listener, and I think you agree with it as well. And I'm not going to get into this pontification preface, but I will say this to anybody who's listening to this. And who has maybe some conjecture about what happened, but wants to believe that their government is telling the truth. And I would only say this. Understand something. The government has complicity in sacrificing its citizens throughout at least a century as a triggering event to get most likely into a war. I won't go into everything right now, but you have the USS Maine, which only now is being told as not the result, the sinking that is, of a mine in Havana Harbor, but supposedly an explosion, an organic explosion from within the ship. I'll say no more than this. That sounds good, but the point is that according to their own documents, the Army took away the hull, the section of the hull that was telling. What reason would that be if we could lay this thing to rest? So we're looking at the Maine as being a sacrifice for getting into the Spanish-American War. We look at the Lusitania and the reason why there was no naval cover for it in the very last few miles it had while Ireland was in its sight and it was sunk by a U-boat. Pearl Harbor, which has now been very well documented, one story in particular by a rear admiral that was there at Pearl and knew very well that Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration knew the Japanese were coming. They goaded them into it, and they let those seamen basically be sacrificed. And we look, and you can talk about the Oklahoma City bombing, you can talk about the Gulf of Tonkin, and here we are now with 9/11. And there's a lot of strange information that's going on about that, but I'll tell you right now, if you want to cling to the government story, don't even bother listening to this. Don't even bother. If you want to hang to a mama government story, you go ahead and do it, because you're not going to get any satisfaction here. If you want to listen to some sense and to the way things really work with physics, then listen, and then you make up your own mind. So Herb, I want to throw it to you. I would assume that the first thing was that the building, the steel girders melted in the heat of this raging fire, and that it also had the strange capability to powderize concrete. I'll say no more than that. I'm going to turn it over to you because you're the guy that's been involved in the physics of this, and you've done a number of presentations. So can we at least start with why the government story is bourgeois about this fire burning down not only 1 and 2, but also 7, and no one's talking about 5 and 6. Look ahead.
Yeah, well, the government had a lot of stories about why the buildings went down or were destroyed. So, like you say, the first one was apparently incredibly hot fires that were actually, well, I guess the government didn't quite, the story about the steel, the fires being so hot they melted steel was more the unofficial mouthpieces of the government, like Chris Wise, a structural engineer, was interviewed in the BBC, and I think Leslie Robertson. So that was their first story. That actually a couple of people I work with still cling to that one. That the fires were so hot that they actually melted the steel, which of course was impossible because jet fuel only burns at about 1800 max, and it takes 2800 degrees to melt steel. But that was their first one. I think they had, like I said, they had several stories, and that was probably the first one to get a few people. And apparently that stuck with some people, at least even people I know. That one stuck for a little while. I mean, stuck all this time. But they didn't cling to that story for that long. But Popular Mechanics, Popular Mechanics used that one as a straw man argument in their issue on their debunking 9/11 conspiracy theories.
All right, now what do you mean by a straw man argument? What does that mean?
What Popular Mechanics said was after the critics of 9/11 of the official 9/11 conspiracy theory pointed out that it was impossible, Popular Mechanics said that they claimed that if the no melted steel, no collapse. When all the critics merely did was point out that the story was impossible, that they were wrong. But like I said, Popular Mechanics made it that, we'll see what the critic says. Well, if there's no collapse, if there's no melted steel, it can't collapse. But the real story is it just had to be sufficiently weakened. So that was the straw man argument that Popular Mechanics used, and they actually even used that one in the History Channel's conspiracy theories, fact or fiction, or whatever it was named.
Generically, what is meant by a straw man argument?
A straw man argument is usually it's an argument it's not a central argument. It's usually actually a lot of times it's put by the perps themselves, and then they publicly knock it down, and it's attributed to the other side. In other words, it's attributed to the critics when they didn't even make that argument, or perhaps like some of the controlled opposition will make that argument, and it will be knocked down publicly. So when someone tries to look into, if someone was like looking into 9/11 and they looked at like Popular Mechanics, they would think, they made this, they made the conspiracy theorists made such and such an argument, and then they debunked it.
All right. So what they might do then is create, shall we say, a conspiracy wacko scenario, attribute it, of course, to the conspiracy critics, and then they would go ahead and knock it down, and they would be right because, after all, it was foolish to begin with, but it was not necessarily at any time advanced by critics of the 9/11 government story.
Unless they were possibly controlled opposition critics.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say one thing, and I want you to jump in if we can do the math. But one of the things, I was up there in New Jersey. I got caught there. I lived in metropolitan New York for all these years. I now live in Florida, and I went back up as I was wont to do. And I went up there and played roller hockey, in fact, on a Sunday. That was the idea. And I wanted to get out of there, but 9/11 got in the way. On Tuesday, it occurred, and I couldn't get a flight out. But what I found, and I'm up in New York, and I'm reading the Bergen Record, I'm reading the New York Times, and I'm reading this replete breakdown in the newspapers of how this all occurred, which struck me a little strange at the time. I bought it. But what struck me was that this was a never-before event. That building supposedly melted to the ground. And, like the NSTB, takes how long to try to break down the reason for an accident and all this other stuff. And yet, on this event, they had it down pat through the overnight, which I thought was kind of interesting. And, of course, it is, because it was bogus. They had this thing cooked and ready to go. Not that the Times did it, but it was offered to them. And so this was already in the works to give to the mainstream newspapers to explain to people what happened that day, which, of course, cannot be true. And I'll throw it back to you and wherever you want to go about how in the world you cannot burn and melt metal or powderize concrete with what kerosene was burning in those buildings.
Well, yeah, like I had mentioned, it's just not hot enough to burn steel. And as far as the concrete and basically all the non-metallic material, including drapes, carpet, anything that wasn't metal was turned to powder. And actually, according to Dave from 9/11 Blimp, as he shows, I think that some material some was actually disintegrated that the heat was so intense that actually some material, some of the concrete and maybe even some of the metal had actually disintegrated. That's pretty. If you go to 9/11 University or 9/11 Blimp, it's a little more sophisticated. It's a little more difficult perhaps to understand, but I think he does a good job of just showing the uptick in the particle size distribution, that you've got material that was actually disintegrated. But the idea that gravity can turn all that concrete into powder is just, if you just look at a conventional controlled demolition, where most of the energy goes towards breaking the beams, when those floors come down, they don't hit the ground and everything turns to dust like you see in Manhattan on 9/11. And that was happening as the buildings were coming down. So that's just a violation of the law of conservation of energy. There's just not enough energy to turn all that into powder. And that's not even, basically, that's one of the arguments that popular mechanics or NIST doesn't even address. I mean, if you look at the NIST report, there's really no mention of anything turning to powder.
All right, let me run this by you. This comes from the book 9/11 on Trial, The World Trade Center Collapse, from Victor Thorne, and in it, it stated that the melting point of steel is 2,795 degrees Fahrenheit. When it becomes a molten liquid, would be 5,182 degrees Fahrenheit. And aluminum's melting point would be 1,148 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet jet fuel produces a maximum temperature of approximately 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit when mixed with air in, let's face it, perfect proportions. So we got a problem here, don't we, right from the outset, as far as what the government story is and how jet fuel, which, let's face it, it's kerosene. People don't realize that, but it's kerosene. And it is not, I would say, the incendiary you would use of choice to burn something big down.
Right, and not only was it molten metal, it was molten metal for weeks afterwards. Even 6 weeks. It took 99 days to extinguish the fires.
However, critics would say then, Herb, well, of course it was that hot because, it was so freaking hot that it melted steel and powderized concrete. My God, look how hot it must have been. But that's not the case at all, is it? When you're looking at the degree that molten whatever it was down at the base was, why do we have those pockets of such hot, we'll just call it molten substance, subterraneanly? Why did that happen?
I can't remember. I believe they've given 3 different explanations for it. And I think what NIST ended up saying was basically that it was irrelevant.
All right.
Which of course, is ridiculous. Because, I can't remember how they worded it. It said it was irrelevant because it didn't say anything about the condition of the buildings while they were standing, which almost doesn't make any sense. But that's what they said about it. Basically, it was irrelevant, which of course, you have to explain how it got there. It wasn't there before. What caused this?
Well, would this be indicative necessarily of, and of course, this is not my bailiwick, so I don't know. But from what I've read over the time, and of course the discussions that you've had with myself and with Dave, that this was the result of a certain amount of energy that created this, that it was not by any way, shape, or form normal. No,
it wasn't. It definitely can't be attributed to jet fuel and the. And remember that even NIST admits the jet fuel burned off within 10 minutes, and then you had office fires, which weren't even hot enough to break glass. So that definitely can't. That energy source can't be the officially acknowledged energy source, and it really even goes beyond conventional explosives. So even in David Ray Griffin's book on collapse of Building 7, they tend, David Ray Griffin and Stephen Jones are in the thermite camp, but even Griffin says the inextinguishable fires, the 99 days fires, is a mystery that's yet to be solved, and I don't think it can be solved by thermite or thermate.
All right, and not to confuse the situation, since we want to keep this basic, and of course the argument about exactly what material was used, I think gets to a point where it's a distraction. Let them argue about it if they will.
Right.
But for our purposes, and I'm not saying that you're not along with that thinking, either. But I mean, for somebody who's just surveying this audio, would you say that it is indicative of what we would call, I guess, some kind of extra energy? And of course, energy in parentheses, because, in quotation marks, because something else was going on in that building other than the fires on the 70th floor.
Yeah, I'd agree. There's definitely a lot of extra energy. So the official theory falls on the idea that gravity could destroy those buildings so quickly and so thoroughly, and it fails in regards to the heat. And that extra energy, as far as when you're talking that molten metal for weeks later, and those 99-day fires, and the pyroclastic dust flows, and the molecular dissociation, that's a lot of heat.
All right, let's talk
probably
about
high temperatures indicate high temperatures and a lot of heat. Apparently and again in David Ray Griffin's book on Building 7, The Mysterious Collapse, which is pretty good, aside from maybe the thermite, which I don't agree with. They said even in a cold day in January, it felt warmer at ground zero than it did 2 blocks away. Well, that's not normal, even for controlled even for conventional explosives. That's not a normal situation. Let alone office fires that were dying out even on 9/11.
All right, 2 things here. One, you mentioned something that's going to be foreign to people's ears, and that is pyroclastic clouds. I think if people could take a visual snapshot while we're talking about this of what we saw with those tremendous clouds of dust that were billowing down streets, can we call that the pyroclastic dust?
Yeah, I think what really denotes a pyroclastic flow rather than just a dust cloud are those solid cauliflower shaped, the shape of them and the form of it takes more. In other words, if you drop something, it's diffuse and it just spreads out and it doesn't have a shape. That doesn't take as much energy as to create that solid shape of material flowing through the air, the dense material flowing through the air to have a shape like that. That obviously takes, if you just look at it, if you see some of those pictures, you can tell there's a lot of energy there. And those are usually only seen in nuclear detonations and volcanoes. So that's, volcanoes are lower temperatures over a greater area, and this was probably caused by higher temperatures in a smaller area.
All right, now,
so you have to have a great deal of heat to expand those dust clouds and still keep a solid shape.
All right, I want to go back to what you think might be in there, or at least just generically say there was something going on other than fire, which obviously was gotten under control. Now, that fire was severe enough, and obviously if people are on the floor where we had impact, you got to believe they're in shock anyway. I mean, think about this. This is your worst nightmare, cubed. And that's why we saw people jumping from the buildings. So they were in duress. There's no 2 ways about it. But that fire subsided. It finally did what it did, and it burnt out. And then later on, we'll talk about the New York fire personnel that went into the buildings and how they were talking about what was going on the moment that the North Tower collapsed. Be that as it may. But when you talk about the pyroclastic plumes, I think it was misrepresented, and help me out here because I'm doing this from memory, but we saw in the United States the building fall, and then we saw, and this is without audio, which is key, we saw pictures of the tower collapse, and then we saw shots of the pyroclastic plumes coming out and people running like hell down the street, when in essence, according to foreign sources who were also ripping video off satellites without any kind of American censorship, it was quite the other way around. That the plumes came out first, designating at least subterranean or ground level explosions, and people were boogieing down the road from that, and then the towers went down. Could you appreciate the distinction? Does that sound right to you?
Wow, that's. I remember you mentioning that before, and I'd kind of forgotten about it. But yeah, that's pretty amazing if that's the case.
Well, the Danish.
And again, that indicates when we get to the audio that there were explosions before the buildings were destroyed.
Absolutely. I mean, the Danish grabbed that and they said, "Here's the raw footage." Do I trust them? Yeah, I do. I mean, they ran it contiguously, and again, like they said, when you saw what you saw in America, you saw it without audio, and it's true. That is exactly what happened. And he said, and the Danish said, well, it's quite the other way around. Those plumes came first. Those people started booking, and then the towers came down. And let me just say this, Herb, would you be opposed if I played that audio that was in a documentary from a Philip Morelli, who was a construction worker who remembers that day?
No.
All right, let's run that audio now.
For 7 years, 37-year-old Philip Morelli was a construction worker inside the trade center. At 8:30, he says he was headed to level B4 in Tower 1, 4 stories below ground.
I go downstairs. The foreman tells me to go to remove the containers. As I'm walking by the main freight car of the building in the corridor, that's when I got blown. I mean, the impact of the explosion, of whatever happened, it threw me to the floor, and that's when everything started happening. Knocked me right to the floor. You didn't know what it was. Of course, you're assuming something just fell over in the loading dock, something very heavy, something very big. You don't know what happened, and all of a sudden you just felt the floor moving, and you get up, and the walls. And then, now I'm hearing that the main freight car, the elevators, fell down. So I was right near the main freight car, so I assumed what that was. Then, you heard that coming towards you. I was racing. I was going towards the bathroom. All of a sudden, I opened the door. I didn't know it was a bathroom, and all of a sudden, a big impact happened again. And all the ceiling tile was falling down. The light fixtures were falling, swinging out of the ceiling. And I come running out the door, and everything, the walls were down, and now I started running towards the parking lots.
Nearly 100 floors below where the first plane hit, Phil felt the devastating impact. But 4 levels below ground, he had no idea terrorists had done it on purpose.
What did you think was going on?
I just thought something, because I know that the loading dock is on B1, that's 3 floors above me. I just assumed that a car or something exploded on B1 or something got delivered and something big and heavy fell over. You just knew it was something big because, I can't even imagine living in San Francisco or earthquakes, but when the floor is moving underneath you and everything is just happening and smoke and people screaming, then I never knew until when I got outside the building and I was running down the west side. That was the only time I ever heard about planes hitting the building.
But before he got out of the building, he faced obstacles underground.
As I ran into the parking lots, everybody screaming. I actually helped somebody get to a staircase that had a broken leg. There was a lot of smoke down there. There was a lot of people screaming. People came with us running up the ramps. We wanted to get help for the people that couldn't move down there. And as we were running up the ramps, and, it's not like a regular mall that you're going straight up. You have to go, you got to go clear across the whole from 1 to 2 World Trade Center. That's the way you got to run. And then all of a sudden, it happened all over again. Building 2 got hit. And then, I don't know that. I just know something else hit us to the floor. Right in the basement, you felt it. Walls were caving in. Everything that was going on. I know of people that got killed in the basement. I know of people that got broken legs in the basement. People that got reconstructive surgery because the walls hit them in the face. And I know I love seeing everybody every day that survived it and was there. And I just hear everybody's story. And it was terrible. No matter where you were in that building, there was no safe place to be except to get out, help as many people as you can, and just try to get out because there was devastation everywhere.
The 37-year-old says he lost a lot of friends in the building, colleagues, Port Authority officers, and clients. That's why he's helping to rebuild. Currently, he is a part of a crew repairing the Verizon building, heavily damaged in the collapse. In his pocket, he carries around a little piece of motivation that keeps him going. A Cub Scout letter that he received inside a pair of gloves donated to the recovery effort at Ground Zero.
And I went to put my hands in the glove, and I took out this letter that was inside the gloves, and it says, "Your hands are doing what ours cannot."
All right, that was Philip Morelli, who gave that testimony during a documentary. I think what's key here is that Morelli was talking about being blown about subterranean levels and not knowing what in the world was going on, the earth moving underneath his feet, and explosions. This has got nothing to do with a plane hitting 3/4 up the height of the tower. And Herb, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, well, I think that would lend credence to William Rodriguez, who was the last man out of the towers, who talked about explosions in the basements before the towers were struck, before the North Tower was struck. And I guess that would lend more credence also to the Danish, who were talking about debris flows chasing people down the streets before the towers came down.
Right. Now, as I said before, before we broke for this audio, without even dealing with thermite, and of course that's going to be information not clear to a novice listener to which this is directed, can we assume that there was something in the building? Now, there's other stories about exotic weaponry. We're not going to go there. I mean, maybe that's true. I don't know. But there had to be something else in there to do the damage that was done. And I don't want to say too much because, I step on my feet when I do this. But, I mean, are we looking at explosives that may have been planted at key parts in that building, since it was told that there were certain floors that were completely vacated? And I'm not saying it was done that with the foreknowledge that there was going to be, explosions, or there were going to be a detonation and a dropping of towers 1 and 2, and it doesn't end there, by the way. But I mean, are we looking at something? And with some of the video also, they call it cutter charges or what? But I'm not going to go any further with that because I'm just not good there, and that's going to throw it to you, Herb. I mean, we're looking at something that was, do you think, implanted in the building to make it do what it did that day?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just the symmetry that they came down, that they were, destroyed is a better word, that they were destroyed through the path of maximal resistance. Right there tells you explosives. The total annihilation of the buildings. It tells you they're explosives. The speed, it's too quick and too destructive. In other words, the energy, according to the official theory, the only energy available to destroy the buildings was the gravitational potential energy. But any energy that goes towards anything other than bringing down the buildings slows the buildings down. And also, as you can see, that there's a good site called German Engineers Help the USA. Now, hopefully by the time the audio goes up, I'll have a link on our site at Uticans for 9/11 Truth.
Okay.
And they have the chronology. They call it WTC. The collapse scheme of WTC 1 and 2. It's actually more the scheme of WTC 1. And what they show, they have 4 diagrams, and you can verify with the video that the official theory is that the tops above the impact zone, whatever struck the towers, that the tops of those buildings crushed the bottom portions of the longer bottom portions of the building. In other words, you had like about the 95th floor on the North Tower and the 80th floor on the South Tower. Well, the official theory is just like that those just came down and crushed the rest of the building. But the problem, and the engineer's site shows that, is that if you look at the video, the tops are actually being blown from the bottom up. So it's starting to descend. That the actual top of the building is fine, but the tops above the impact zone are already starting to be destroyed. So even that material that supposedly is crushing the rest of the building is already starting to be destroyed before anything happens to the portion below the impact zone, if this is making sense.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And then it's completely gone. So in other words, at that point, not only is it too quick, there's no pressure, as the engineers say, there's no pressure on the trunk. In other words, the portion above the impact zone has been destroyed. So there's nothing to crush the bottom portion of the standing portion of the building with.
Yep.
Because most of it, it's been turned, all the floors and the non-metallic material has been turned to powder, with most of it landing outside the building. The steel beams are gone, and some of those even landed 500 feet away. So there's no reason why this supposed collapse should be continuing. Another way to look at it is there's no portion of the tower standing above the descending rubble cloud. So they'll call, if you look at a picture and you look at the standing portion and you look at the portion above that, it's not falling, it's been destroyed, which is they always like to use the term fall, but it's actually been destroyed, which is a whole nother matter. Which is now, again, you're getting into the law of conservation of energy, and again, as the German engineer said, there's no pressure on the trunk to continue this.
Okay.
It should have stopped right there if the official theory was, held. And another problem with it is that, as you know, in the South Tower, it actually started to topple. And it should have continued to topple over, leaving the rest of the building standing.
That's right.
So, did I answer the question, or did I go off too much on that?
No, believe me, no. That's right on the money. Because
but that's the official theory in a nutshell. The pancake theory is done. The theory about the fires, melting steel is done. The official theory is as of a pile driver that the weight just crushed down on the building. And like I said, the German engineers say when they have the four diagrams, do a good job of showing why that's wrong. And maybe the simplest way to think of it is to see that no portion of the building was standing above the rubble cloud as it was coming down. In other words, there's nothing above. It's just been destroyed. And that just continues right to the ground. And another point about explosives being planted in the building, another on the German site they look at the huge fireball in the South Tower. Well, they did calculations, and that's too big to be a result of flight, the amount of fuel that would be on Flight 175, which is alleged to hit the South Tower. So again, that tells you even that was a Hollywood effect with explosives planted in that building. So that answers the question, I think?
No. What I'm doing is I'm also looking to set up the next question, and I'm taking a look around. Now, maybe Dave would have odds with this, and I can't remember why. It's been a long time, but I make something of this. Maybe I shouldn't, but what happened was the North Tower was hit, WTC-1, at 8:46. WTC-2 was hit at 9:03 a.m. I guess what would that be? About 17 minutes after the first. But the WTC-2, the South Tower, collapsed first. Do I have that right?
Right.
All right. My point was, if the tower that was hit secondly crashed first, and if all things were equal with the jets that went into these two towers, I find it a little interesting that the tower that was hit last would come down first. But I make something out of it, like you said, because it was the South Tower that looked like it was the classic kick a table leg out from under it. You got three, it's going to tip over. My feeling was they had to blow the tower that was going to start to come down because they could not leave all those floors intact if they wanted to sell the story about the building being melted, the steel being melted, and the concrete powderized, because obviously the section above that kind of oblique hit, if we remember, it almost looks like the plane was about to miss it. to me, I thought that they did not, I mean, they wanted to pull the building that got hit first down if you wanted to go along with some kind of pattern. And in essence, the second building that was hit came down first. And I think I still think it's because that top section was coming over. And it was going to come over intact, and they could not sell the melted steel thing because the girders above it were not melted at all. Now, I may be wrong about that, and I understand it. I'm going to, that's my story, and I'll stick by it. But what do you feel, Herb?
All right. I guess like two things. First, as far as I'll just give you kind of the quasi-official explanation, according to Mark Loiseau from Controlled Demolition Inc., as to why the South Tower went down first, and that goes with their pile driver theory because that had more weight above because it was struck lower than the North Tower. Now, of course, the problem there, I'm just giving you what their explanation is. That's their answer to why, even though it had less fires in the South Tower, that's their explanation basically as to why that started to go first. Of course, the problem with that is it started to topple, and that's the problem. They don't mention that, but that's the problem with their explanation. As far as what I say, and I know Dave McGowan said it also, is the reason why it's starting to topple is because the core was being destroyed, and that might have gone to the subterranean explosions.
Okay.
In other words, if you think of you've got the perimeter columns and the core column, right?
Right.
The core columns.
Right.
I would think of that as the old like you go to an old diner where they got the table and then they got that huge tube in the middle.
The center post. Yep.
Right. If you take off one of the legs, it's still going to stand. Right.
Right.
But now, say you take off that center, now it's going to topple to where that leg was. So what I'm saying is, I think that was already indicating, I think, had they not been doing something to the core, that wouldn't have toppled, because the core columns would have held it up.
All right, so in both 1 and 2, then, can we agree that if it was supposed to be somewhat in pattern, that the core columns in both of the two tallest towers would have been already detached?
Yeah.
Right. All right. So that centerpiece that would have held it up, as you mentioned in the diner paradigm.
Right. Now it's being destroyed. So now it had down. That's why it's starting to topple.
Okay. So
and that's why but then you're right. As it started to topple, they had to destroy it. And again, in that German engineer site, they have some good pictures of how you can see. Again, you've got that cap starting to fall, and then the next picture they show again, just like how in the North Tower, the cap is losing its height from the bottom up. Yes. In other words, it's being blown up again from the bottom up, while the portion below hasn't changed its height one bit. It's the cap is being blown from the bottom up. Of the cap, that is, not the tower, but the cap, and it's actually, they show how it's actually lost its height. Now, if gravity was the only force there, it just simply would have toppled.
Yeah, I mean, so in some we could say that the building was compromised. I don't know if I want to say from the bottom up, but certainly the bottom went first, so there would be no resistance.
Well, yeah, it's being compromised in the core columns.
Right.
Right, and then what's happening is it's when the destruction starts, it's a series of detonations from the top down.
And I know this may sound elementary, but one of the things I thought of too when they explained all this, and I'm thinking, okay, if you've got this raging inferno that somehow, some way is and we've heard the stories about, the kerosene leaked down the elevator shafts, but I mean, you're still talking about a dissipating fuel substance with how much available oxygen and such to work. But, I'm thinking to myself, like, if you've got something melting, I'm not going to liken it to an ice cream cone, but I mean, come on a summer day. I mean, if you got something melting, I don't know that it's just going to all fall real quick. I mean, I'm thinking about something that's going to drip and drab and give some resistance and clinginess. I mean, I know these are not technical words, But can you understand where I'm coming from? It's like if this thing's melting, how come it isn't kind of like coming down like a peeled banana, so to speak?
Yeah, right. That's another one that they just kind of disregarded, was the elevator. They're going down the elevator shaft and all those other distractions. But really, the central issue is the physics issue of how this building is being so thoroughly destroyed so quickly, and why is it coming straight down or through or centered around the vertical axis. That's all the rest of that has that's completely irrelevant. Whether it came down whether fuel came down the elevator shaft or not is really irrelevant to the physics argument. No. But that's one that a long time ago I had posted sent the webmaster of this it was a message board, and the guy who owned the message board, I thought was a reasonable guy, and I sent him Dave when I was first starting to look at it. I sent him Dave's 9/11 page, and he posted it. And one of the first things the guy mentioned was that elevator shaft story. And I said that's completely irrelevant to the question at hand. Is how were these buildings destroyed? And that's the question that NIST basically doesn't even really answer when they just simply say there's a pile driver after collapse initiation and end of story, and don't even mention that all the non-metallic material was turned to powder while the building was coming down.
And again, I've heard this firsthand. When people hear, well, it's jet fuel, they're thinking it's some kind of like super, atomic kind of, and I'm like, no, man, it's kerosene. Don't you get it? And what is it? What is it? Type B? Is that what they use? I think it's B, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking for it too. I don't want to misstate it here, but here's the point. This is not what you want to use if you want a raging inferno. It's just not what's going to happen.
No, it's not an exotic fuel.
No. And the people who jumped at that time, the fire was at its worst, and I'm sure, there's a plane in your office level. Believe me, people are in shock. Nobody jumps from, my God, that high up without thinking that's the better way out. We don't mean to at any way, shape, or form, disrespect what happened there, but certainly there was something that was extremely urgent at that time, but that did start to dissipate. And we'll talk later on about the New York Fire Department putting personnel up in there. Obviously, firemen who are trained to go into skyscrapers don't go into buildings they think are compromised. And I think maybe if I could just allude to this, and people can take a look on the internet if they wish. The complete report, I don't believe, is up there anymore. Herb, you have it in the files that I sent to you. But we have the Meridian Plaza fire in Philadelphia in 91. 19 hours, I believe, a certain number of floors burnt. And it was raging. And fire personnel went into it, and they had to leave because of intense heat and also dense smoke. And I believe they lost 2 of their brethren during that. They left, admittedly, thinking that the skyscraper might collapse, but it didn't do it. And in the files that I sent to you, Herb, you'll see photos where it was obviously, structurally, it was compromised. The integrity of the building was certainly such that it could never be salvaged again. However, floors buckled, concrete sagged, but the building didn't collapse. And what we're saying is, check it out, folks. No building has ever melted to the ground. Not before and not after. And the Meridian fire, I think, is a good indication that, as they had said with the Philadelphia Fire Department, when you get into a skyscraper situation, for the most part, the building must put itself out, because firemen can't do it. And that's exactly what happened. The fire reached a level where the sprinklers kicked in and extinguished the fire. But 19 hours it raged, and that building was still standing a year later.
And another good one. I'm sorry. Another good one was the fire in Madrid, Spain.
Yep.
And actually, I believe it was 10 floors actually started to pancake and stopped.
Yep.
So that at one time the pancake theory was the prevailing theory.
Right, and they even admitted they thought it might happen in the Meridian, but it didn't. For the most part, I'm going to say urban legend for lack of better words. It's assumed that might happen, but it didn't happen in Philadelphia, and it has never happened, and it didn't happen in New York, and it hasn't happened after. And the Madrid fire was after, right?
Yeah, and when they're talking about a building collapsing, they're not necessarily talking about a total collapse, and they're certainly not talking about the kind of destructive energy that you saw in the towers. And they're talking, if the vertical column started to weaken, well, it would start to bend. It wouldn't be this top-down, progressive top-down destruction like we saw, in the matter of like a few seconds over free fall speed. That's not what, that's not, when they're having a scenario that the building might give, they're talking about I'm sure they're talking about floors going, they're not talking about what we saw in the towers or Building 7.
At this point, if you don't mind, and I want to go back after these audio clips, Herb, and talk about 7 and even maybe WTC 5 and 6, which nobody talks about, if that's okay with you. But I'd like to play the clips from Ladder Company 7 that was involved in a documentary in which the firemen are talking about they were there and they talked about it seemed as if the building was being blown, right? Bang,
right.
Bang, bang. And then the second one I want to play is audio from NBC News, Channel 4 New York, Pat Dawson, speaking to New York Fire Department personnel about what was going on in the towers. And in fact, even before we go to 7, I'd like to talk about, too, how we have an impossibility, I think, with this tower being an inferno, and yet New York personnel in it communicating, being active, and certainly not at all burnt to a crisp the moment that the South Tower falls. So if you don't mind, I'll go to the two clips back to back, and I'll pick up with you on the other side. Is that okay?
Yep, that's fine.
All right.
We made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah, detonated.
Plans to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running. Just ran up West. And then you just sort of this cloud of shit chasing you down.
Couldn't outrun it.
West Street. I couldn't outrun it.
So what'd you do?
I jumped behind a battalion car.
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat? Pat,
Matt,
can you hear me?
if we are, yes, I can, Matt. If there is a war against terrorism that started, rather ongoing right now, it started here at about 8:45 this morning, as you described, a big hole in the skyline at the southern end, the southern tip of Manhattan Island, where the 2 World Trade Center towers have stood for the last 25 years, 110 stories high. They are no longer there. Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department, who was obviously one of the first people here on the scene after those 2 planes were crashed into the side, we assume, of the World Trade Center towers, which used to be behind me over there. Chief Albert Turry told me that he was here just literally 10 or 15 minutes after the events that took place this morning. That is the first crash. He said that at one point he had roughly 10 alarms. That would equate to roughly 200 to 225 New York City firefighters who were in the building. This was after the crash, trying to rescue civilians who were in there. Now, earlier this morning on the Today Show, we spoke to the director of the World Trade Center. He said that at that hour of the morning, you could have upwards of 10,000 people in each of those towers. That would be 20,000 people total in each tower. The chief of safety of the Fire Department of New York City told me that shortly after 9 o'clock, he had roughly 10 alarms, roughly 200 men in the building trying to effect rescues of some of those civilians who were in there. and that basically he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place, and then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. One of the secondary devices he thinks that took place after the initial impact was, he thinks, may have been on the plane that crashed into one of the towers. The second device he speculates, was probably planted in the building. So that's what we have been told by Albert Turry, who is the Chief of Safety for the New York City Fire Department. He told me that just moments ago. Now, we are continuing to hear explosions. Here downtown, and what we've been told by some of the fire officials is that there are some gas lines that occasionally are exploding down there, because obviously, as you can imagine, there are a lot of open gas lines down in the southern part of Manhattan where the World Trade Center towers used to be. As far as the situation right here, basically what we have are hundreds of New York City firefighters and other New York City rescue units who are massed here. There is a cordon just down there. We are not sure, to be honest, if some rescue workers have tried to go beyond that point as yet. When we spoke to the head of the Port Authority Police, that would be the organization that is in charge of the World Trade Center building itself, the Port Authority Police chief told us that they were at that point, about, I'd say 40 minutes ago, about to make a decision on whether or not it was safe to send emergency workers back in there. But the bottom line is that according to the Chief of Safety of the New York City Fire Department, he says that he probably lost a great many men in those secondary explosions, and he said that there were literally hundreds, if not thousands of people in those two towers when the explosions took place. He said everything above the 60th floor was extremely difficult to get to, as you can imagine.
Well, there you have it. We have a situation here. You heard Pat Dawson, NBC, Channel 4 New York, talking about what he had been discussing with New York fire personnel, and that they thought there were bombs in the building. All right, what else do you need to know? You also heard before, for a documentary, that Ladder Company 7 saying, it was almost like the building was being, pulled, bang, bang, bang. Well, what do you think, folks, man? If it looks like a duck and it talks like a duck, God damn it, it might be a duck. What else do you need to know? And ask yourselves why you've never heard these clips before. We're not making this up. I ripped these things as I knew they would disappear, and they, in fact, did disappear. And I want to throw it back to Herb, because here's the situation. We had, in the New York Times, and you had those files, there were communications between New York fire personnel in the South Tower, right at the crash zone, where you had them talking to their base, saying, we're knocking down some fire, we're evacuating people. They were not harried, they were not freaked out, they were very active and communicative. And here's what I'm saying. They carried on those discussions the moment the South Tower fell. So if the South Tower, like the North Tower, was a flaming inferno, how in the world can people be not singed and talking as if we can get out of this? How can that happen? And Herb, I don't know if there's anything for you to get in on that, but by all means, feel free, because you have those files too, and I can't understand if the thing is going to be toasting people left and right. How can these guys be all right the moment the tower collapsed?
Yeah, there's not much to say on that. Especially in the South Tower, where most of that jet fuel, again, it might not be jet fuel, but the fires in the South Tower were not as intense. They were dying down, and there was less of a fire in the South Tower for sure. And these were just ordinary office fires. They weren't extraordinarily big or hot, and they certainly weren't very long lasting.
And like I said, I gave my 9/11 files to Herb and Andy because I was kind of like, in semi-retirement as much times as Brent Favre is, except this time he really did retire, I guess. But,
yeah.
And we talked about that, and it's in the New York Times for everybody to read. Here's this communication going back and forth, And I'm saying, okay, folks, if you've got two towers that are being burnt to a freaking crisp, how can you have people in there, okay, not under duress, got things under control, and then the tower collapses because of it being a raging inferno? You can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways.
And I will say, as much as, I mean, a lot of times I forget about the fires because it's really about the physics. But I like to say, I have to be mindful that people think it is because of fires. And even according to the official theory, it was the reason the towers came down or fell, whatever they used, collapsed, is because it's still a fire theory that the plane impact knocked it widely dislodged the fireproofing material. So it's still their theory is a fire theory. But that even if that were the case, the fireproofing material only provides a few hours of protection anyway. So in the Meridian Plaza and the Madrid fire, that fireproofing material is long gone.
Yeah.
So I just the fires. So if that's the case, then you're left with dwindling fires. So yeah, it is important to stress that these fires, especially in the South Tower, were not that hot.
No,
the North Tower, I think they were a little bit. They were a little bigger in the North Tower, and I think they actually started to kick up a little. But the South Tower was mostly, by that time, was black smoke.
And the other thing is as well, it knocked the fireproofing off the walls and the pipes. Shut up. I mean, that's such bullshit. And the government comes out with it, and everybody believes it. But it's like my former partner Harry, who did the show with me, saying, "Did you ever try to sweat a pipe that had water in it when you were trying to torch it? Yeah, good luck with that." No, sorry, man, it doesn't work that way. If you want to take the government's high road, you can do it, but it's just not the truth. Now, having said that, and again, like I said, maybe I'll get those files back or whatever and post those stories in which you can follow the discussion, the communications between those New York fire personnel that were in the building and those, at base command or whatever. And you just tell me how the fire can melt the building and people can be talking to people at the same moment. No, like I said, you can't have it both ways. I won't believe this any further. But moving on to another thing, now we get to the famous WTC-7. Cynics have said, those wonderful Arabs in flying machines, 2 planes, 3 buildings go down. Figure it out. We heard a lot of wild stories, which are much worse than conspiracy theories about why 7 went down. Yeah, I know. Yeah, do you want to tackle that one?
Probably one of the best ones. It wasn't. I think that the question was put forth to what's his name? Was it Thomas Keene? Who's Keene Hamilton? Which is it? Thomas Keene, Lee Hamilton?
No, well, Thomas Keene. Yeah, Thomas Keene, the former governor of New Jersey, who's an absolute idiot, and Lee Hamilton, fronted the government commission that was, goddamn it, going to get to the root of this whole thing. Yeah.
Well, he was asked on some show as to about Building 7, and first off, he couldn't remember if they'd even mentioned it in the 9/11 Commission report, which, of course, they didn't. But so he offered his theory that it was from the aftershocks of the towers going down hours prior.
Well, and didn't, among other idiots, that asshole Schnitt down here in Florida, who you've got a whiff of, who syndicated somewhat quasi-nationally, God almighty, please keep it to a minimum. But you remember there was some flaming debris that came off 1 and 2 and knocked out a leg of 7,
right.
And
the structural damage from the debris from the towers. Yeah, that was because that was the in this preliminary report was they were going with the structural damage, which then when they came out with their final report, they said they had nothing to do with it. So the funny thing about all these different theories they have, and I'd like to kind of quote a little bit or refer to,
sure.
Again, the book I mentioned, The Mysterious Collapse of World Trade Center 7, why the official report about 9/11 is Unscientific and False by David Ray Griffin, which is a really good book. What NIST did is they ruled out the most likely hypothesis, of course, which is a controlled demolition, because the only prior total collapses of steel frame buildings had been due to controlled demolition, and it exhibited features that are unique to controlled demolitions. But anyway, what all these theories have done, it's violating a scientific principle that like effects imply like causes. They have all these, some that are completely contradictory, but the effect is the same. But NIST has been giving, and all the official, quasi-official theories are all different causes for the same effect. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. To me, it
does.
I mean,
and the only cause for that effect, for the effect seen, the only cause that's ever been has been a controlled demolition. So that's why one point I want to make is that the controlled demolition hypothesis, and even Jim Meigs has kind of said it, and then he lied. But the question of what brought down 7, what destroyed the towers, is a scientific question. So it follows that, a point I want to make to anybody trying to explain something about 9/11, I think a point I want to make is it is a scientific theory. It's not a conspiracy theory. And again, NIST is looking for everything but the most likely hypothesis.
But again, I mean, I'm sorry, but if you want to stick to the government story, which of course fills every newspaper, every TV channel, okay guys, you win, if you want to believe that. And it's a nice story, but it isn't science. And it's just the way it is. And people, of course, and this is the condition that we've been brought into, we trust our government for everything. We were told bad old Arabs did this, and that's all there is to it. And of course, people pack on the side of the government. Do we want to go into Patricia Androvic's testimony about what happened with 5 and 6?
Okay, if you want. I'm a little.
Yeah, I
was looking up some things, and I got a couple of things to add, I guess, to that.
All right. Well, do you want to go first? I mean, that's okay. I'll step aside.
You can go first because you've done more on it.
Well, not necessarily, but what there was. Patricia Androvic is a real human being. She works for EMS. When I tried to contact her, she was living in a suburb of Queens. I think it was. I don't know. I want to say. I think it was Rosalind, but we can leave her alone. I emailed her after she gave, I guess you could say, somewhat of a testimony to a certain person, which I have always kept. I was moved by it, and I contacted her, and she said to me, and you can understand this. She's like, no, I tell you what, I don't want to do any more. I just laid it out once as a matter of record for history to record whatever it wants to do, and I'm done with it. And I never bugged her. I could find her. I know where she is. She's still listed. I'm not going to do it. But now we talk about 1 and 2, which are the North and South Towers. We talk about 7 that went down also, but we don't talk about any of the others. And 5 and 6 are also involved in this. But I'll just pick it up where she talks about what happened to her while 5 and 6 were going down. And she said, picking up at a good point, and I don't want to go too far in. Well, no, I probably should. It said, I didn't know what was happening, but there was a loud roar, lots of crashing sounds. I was attempting to put my stretcher back into the vehicle. The ground was shaking, and I saw a sea of people, mostly the various agencies on scene, fire, police, EMS, all running toward me. I had no idea what they were running from, but I decided I'd be ahead of them and just started running west toward the river. That would be the Hudson River. As I was running, parked cars were blowing up and some were on fire. The street was cracking a bit as well. Very shortly after I started running, everything became one big black cloud. I was near the West Side Highway and I couldn't see around me anymore. at least 3, and she answers this to questions that were posed to her. And so they were asked how many vehicles were blown up. Well, we don't really care about that, but let's get to the good stuff when she says, okay, I just kept running. I was aware there were other people running as well. After passing the cars on fire, I was trying to find someplace safe. I tried to run into the lobby of 6 World Trade, but there were federal police, maybe 4 to 6 of them, standing in the open doorways. As I tried to run in, they wouldn't let me, waving me out, telling me, you can't come in here, keep running. As I turned to start running west again, and that would be toward the river, I saw a series of flashes around the ceiling of the lobby, all going off, one by one, like Christmas lights that, quote, chase in pattern. I think I started running faster at that point. She said, I was in the doorway, but not inside the lobby. I remember being able to breathe the somewhat cleaner air coming from inside the building, but they stopped me as I was trying to get past the threshold. She said, it all happened at the same time, and that would be the explosions and her being in the lobby. She says, I got to the doorway. I was told not to come in. As the officer was telling me I couldn't get into the building, the flashes started going off. There were probably 4 to 5 officers in the doorway, and of course she's repeating this now. I could see a few others back in the lobby. And lastly, I'm going to say this. This is from her. Well, they were in light brown uniforms, meaning the federal police, and Smokey the Bear hats, federal police. I assumed they were federal because the NYC police don't look like that, and I knew there were a lot of federal officers in the WTC as well as the surrounding area, so it wasn't strange to me to see them there. But I did find it very odd that they wouldn't let me to get in to get cover. But like I say, in that profession, someone tells you to go an opposite way, you're going. You don't ask, you just go. I remember hoping they got out as I was watching whatever the small explosions were, because they stayed in that building. They weren't locking it up after evacuating or anything like that. And she surmises that they perished in the building. So now we have other situations where, according to Androvic, 5 and 6 probably met the same fate as 7, 1, and 2. Again, 2 planes, magnificent Arabs and flying machines, and now we have at least 5 buildings falling the same way. And go ahead, Herb, you said you had some stuff there.
I don't think 5 and 6 went down. I think, but they had huge craters from in the top. Because 5 I think was taken down later on. What they had were huge. If you see them, they had huge holes in the tops of the buildings, and they were on fire, which is I don't think has ever been explained. But I don't know if they went down.
Well, 5, I remember the aerial photos, and one of them looked like it had a crater in the middle of it, whatever the hell that was about. Agreed. And I don't know if that was 5 or 6. And actually, I mean, let's face it, I mean, I don't want to, we're going to be really fastidious about this. She isn't saying that she saw the thing collapse. She just she saw, she heard pops and she saw flashes, and she just kept going. So, let me see. She was asked, have you seen a building being demolished with explosives on TV, and were the flashes and pops similar to that? And she said, it did remind me of just that. I had seen something on a Las Vegas casino being demolished, and of course I think we all saw that, and that's what it reminded me of. So I think she's saying that 6 did go down. 5 she wasn't sure about, but she knew something else was going on and that's what got her going as well. So anyway, that's the story. Yeah, you're right. If we're going to be, like I said, close to the vest, we don't really know what happened with 5 and 6, but it would seem to me, and I think you had that as well, that something nefarious happened to 6 as well. At least she thought that there were charges going on, and if that's, if that isn't going to take a building down, why are we having this? But that is the case, and again, that came from an EMS worker that was called in from Queens, Patricia Androvic. So, all right, now you wanted to add some stuff to that, and by all means, Herb, do it.
Yeah, I guess what I would say was there's very little said. I think by NIST, nothing said about 5 and 6. I think FEMA had something on the fires on 5, I believe, not so much on 6. But I guess the theory is that those craters in the tops of the buildings were created by debris from the towers, while problem is we don't see a lot of film, because if there was debris from the towers, well, that debris would be inside those buildings. And we don't know if it is, because we don't really see a lot of photographs other than from the top where you can't see in. And what caused those fires? Mm-hmm. Another question I would ask. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I think what she says sounds pretty credible to me, and I think there's something to it. It's just we don't have a lot as far as the photographs to say, well, if it was like beams going into the buildings, well, let's see the pictures of them in the buildings. So I guess that would be what I would add to that. The little bit I know, from just from a basic, a few basic questions about it.
All right, and in sum, would you say that the true physics of the situation were such that it was impossible for fire to be the cause of, I mean, you call it what you want, 1, 2, and 7, 1, 2, 5, 6, and 7 buildings? Well, let's put it this way: it never happened before. It hasn't happened since. Could it possibly that the fires have done that on that day, Tuesday?
No.
Right.
Not in the manner not in the manner that the towers were destroyed, and in the manner that Building 7 was also destroyed. Yeah, I mean, it was destroyed too, not quite as energetic as the towers, but it was destroyed, and it collapsed into its own footprint. And according to experts like Mark Loazzo, something like that to happen has to be completely planned.
Now, I don't know if this is the time to do this, but I suspect it might. And I don't know how you feel about going into this area, but anyone listening to this is going to start asking questions. Well, what happened to the people that were on the planes? Were they in the plane? Blah, blah, blah. Look, we can't answer everything. We can only say that the government story about the destruction of the towers doesn't wash. Whatever else happened that day was not good by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly wasn't the way the government said it went down. One of the things that gets me, and you've heard this, when we had Tartaglia on from a fire and rescue unit, search and rescue unit, from Pennsylvania, who went in the second day and saw the absolute chaos and destruction, just absolutely nearly puked over the idea, as Matthew had said, that amongst all this destruction, where you could barely identify anything because everything, shards of glass, everything was just pulverized, the government would find 2, not 1, but 2 pristine paper passports that would identify Ada and whoever else there was. I mean, as the pilots in those planes. Now, again, I don't know if you want to go there, but do you have any take on that?
I'm just kind of, I can't believe I even fell for that back then. That should have been the first, one of the first clues that something was up. Because, I mean, it's just, of all things, and it just happened to be them. Incredible. I mean,
now,
how they could say that with a straight face.
Well, I'll say this. Is it your recollection? I feel like I'm leading the witness, and I guess I am. But, and I'll tell you what, when you come back for a second show to deal with the Pentagon and Shanksville, which is just actually incredible beyond belief, I'll play some clips, of course, that, you'll never hear again from CBS this time, about all that took place. But we're not going to go there right now with that situation, but it's, again, here's a situation where, in the second batch of audio I'll play in part 2, it talks about how the government had no clue whatsoever that this was going to go down. They had no transmissions or communications or anything that indicated that these 19 Arabs were going to pull this off. And yet, I'll say within hours, although I think it was probably within an hour, I don't know if I remember correctly, the government identified all 19 perps. Whenever have you seen any kind of police work that was that effective, that quickly, for such an ever before happening, I guess, criminal event? I've never seen it. They had no clue what was happening, and within an hour they gave you 19 guys. Are you freaking kidding me? Now, I'll say this. Atta and his sidekick, whoever the hell he is, was seen in the concourse of Logan Airport. That's fine. You, Herb, and I can go into the concourse of Logan Airport. That doesn't put me on a plane. And in an Oprah Winfrey show, they had a ticket counter guy in, I guess it was Portland, Maine, who actually dealt with Atta and his sidekick. And there's no doubt that they flew from Portland to Logan. And that's all that anybody knows that happened. And the ticket counter guy said that he thought it was really kind of interesting that Atta was sullen and kind of cross, but his sidekick was standing behind him, giving eyes to the clerk, like basically saying, "This guy's an asshole." And the clerk said, "I found it strange that he would kind of be joking around hours before they would go to their death." And my take is, well, they weren't going to their death. And then you have the story about, well, there were airline uniforms in the trunk of the rental car that Atta had. And I'm like, so what? If you're going to go on a suicide mission and you're going to be a passenger, what the hell do you need with pilot uniforms? That was just another one of the stupid, Inspector Clouseau clues they were giving the American public to connect the dots that should have been connected. And I mean, again, Herb, you direct yourself very much so when you and Andy were doing presentations with the physics of the situation and the mechanics. But I mean, again, I don't want to cut you out of this, but I mean, you heard all this stuff too. I don't know, throw your weight in on that.
You're right. I mean, sometimes I wonder if I've kind of shortchanged some of the more ridiculous things, like how can you solve a crime that you didn't even know was going to happen? How can you solve that in an hour? Why do you not even want a 9/11? What, you don't even want to investigate it. You don't even want to commission it. Sometimes I think maybe those are, before you even get into the physics, that might be a good way. You have to sometimes try to know your audience or think of different ways to wake somebody up. I guess in the end, I went to the physics because I had all those things to me were like they definitely mattered, but to me at least, I thought I couldn't prove it till I did it with the physics.
Exactly.
Those were, but again, I think those are good lead-ins, and sometimes, I think maybe I should. When I've had at least the opportunities to go on something more mainstream, should I have just gone with that first? Should I have gone with the inability to intercept even one plane, or sometimes I think you get ahead of yourself because
yes, you do.
I think there are some red herrings to a certain extent, and you've kind of dismissed those. Like even again the inability to intercept a plane. Well, they gave 3 different accounts of why they couldn't intercept a plane, and to me, that's telling you, look here, for some, why wouldn't they get it right the first time? So I think it's a little bit of red herring to a certain extent, and so I kind of forget about those, which, maybe I shouldn't sometimes. I'm getting ahead of myself as to why they might be red herrings, but the inability, even if, I'm thinking, okay, is this, you start thinking, is this lending credence to the official theory? Is this one they want?
Yeah.
But even that little bit might help, so it's kind of a fine line, and that's probably why I end up going more with the physics, because that for me, that made sense. But again, the story of how they could solve a crime in an hour that they had no idea was coming. Yeah, that should have been a red flag.
Yeah, and like I said, I'll play that audio from CBS in which, some talking head is reiterating that they had no transmissions, no blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. You had no idea this was going to happen, and you give us 19 perps honestly, within an hour. But I'll give them a little slack. I'll say a couple of hours. And you have 2 pristine passports, and that's what Tartaglia said, who came out of that search and rescue unit out of southeast Pennsylvania. He said, when I took a look at that and I heard the story of them plucking out not one but two paper passports out of debris that was completely decimated, he was like, that's what got him. He's like, you got to be kidding me. All right? I mean, come on, folks. How, did you all fall off a turnip truck, God damn it, just because your government told you something? Wake the hell up, man.
Well, it was a shock and awe thing, when you have someone in shock, when like people were, and you're the first one in there to put that in their head. It's amazing how it sticks.
Yeah, and they also did something else. They gave people boogeymen to hate, and that drew any questioning away from whatever the government told people, because they were so consumed in the hatred for 19 individuals. Now, let's face something, too. Nobody knows if they're Arabs. Nobody knows if they're Italian. Nobody knows if they're Israeli or Jordanian or Spanish. Nobody knows. Most of those identities were faked or stolen, however you want to say it. And nobody really knows what happened to any of them. And the whole idea of these characters, especially Ada and others, who were at air bases, some of them military installations, go figure that out, folks, if you don't think there was some help there from the government, who actually sucked at flying. But they were there. They made themselves known. They acted up. These wonderful Muslims went to titty bars in Florida and left Korans on the seat. I mean, that's what I would do, obviously, if I was a real, devoted Muslim. And I mean, come on, folks. Are you give me a break? I mean, go ahead.
Go. First, I just want to tell a funny little story that kind of had something. It's a 9/11 thing, but go ahead if you want to finish. I'm sorry.
No, I'm waiting for the funny story.
This is just a little aside that, I think my radar's gotten pretty good. But do you remember James Wood going on the Tonight? Is it Wood or Woods? The actor? Is it Wood? That was James Wood.
James Wood, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Do you remember he was on, the Tonight Show, or was it Letterman, talking about how he was on a flight before and he tried to get a hold of the FAA. He thought these guys were suspicious, blah, blah, blah. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
Well, that was one of the things that helped cement the whole hijacker thing, right? So I told my wife, I said, there's something about this James Wood. I don't trust this guy. So she did a little research on him, and his father was in Army intelligence. He went to MIT, which has got a whole other thing with Noam Chomsky,
yep.
Thomas Egar with the pancake theory, MIT. If you get into the cold fusion at all, MIT fudged their results to say there was nothing to it. James Wood went to MIT and dropped out his last semester to be an actor, and all these. There's something about this James Wood guy. And he went in there to help cement that whole story about the 19 Arab hijackers, because he had reported something earlier, he knew something was up. There were these suspicious guys, and no one ever did anything about it. Just a little thing I just thought I'd throw.
But James was just helping us out.
Yeah.
But here,
don't trust that guy.
Well, I mean, and we'll go back to the Kennedy assassination, and if you think that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only shooter, again, folks, turn me off, because we got nothing in common. But what I had to laugh at when I did the interview with Joan Mellon, who wrote the book about Garrison, who I thought was pretty much an asshole back when, but he wasn't. The reason why he went after what was going on was because the plans to kill Kennedy and the characters that were involved were basically doing their training and and all the preliminary actions in Louisiana, basically in his jurisdiction. So now I understand. But I mean, it is documented how Lee Harvey Oswald was all over Louisiana, getting in all kinds of trouble. Why? Because he was being remembered. He didn't know what he was being remembered for. He was an asset who didn't know what the hell was going on. He didn't realize he was a patsy until the deal went down in Dealey Plaza. Now, take that for what it's worth. I understand. But the thing was, there was a time I thought he was a shooter, and now that boy did not shoot anything. He got his ass suckered. That's what government does. Okay, fine. Why am I saying that? Because with Ada and the rest of the idiots, basically sucking at flying wherever they were and being assholes, they were being, like Oswald was in Louisiana, they were being remembered. So when the deal went down and the names went on the air, everybody said, oh yeah, that's right, they were here. And that cements the fallacy. That's what all that crap was about. You can't put one of those guys in a cockpit in any of the, quote, 4 planes. And that's what the deal is. Nobody knows who those characters were. Nobody knows what their nationalities were. Nobody knows what their religious affiliations were. There were 19 characters up there, and nobody knows who they were or where they went or what happened. So,
yeah, well, we don't even know if they were up there.
No.
I mean, we don't know if they were even at the. I mean, they more than likely weren't up there. They were somewhere, and maybe, yeah, like you say, Ada was at Logan, but that's about as far as you can take it.
And that's perfectly fine, and that's how he got remembered. Hence, that's why the Portland clerk, the counter guy, tells his story in Oprah, and there's no. I don't doubt him whatsoever. The guy was in tears, the poor guy. But he remembered that stuff and thought it was so odd that while Otto was being a prick, basically, the other guy was like rolling his eyes like, he's a prick. And he thought that was just so odd for somebody who's going off to his death. Well, it is, because he wasn't going off to his death. So they flew from Portland to Logan. They got videoed, supposedly. Nobody knows how the hell or when that happened. But you and I can get videoed in Logan, too, in the concourse. Anybody can get videoed in the concourse, but you can't put them on a plane. So, anyway, they leave that information for Americans to connect the dots. They're not connecting the dots for us. They're just giving us stuff so we figure out we can sleuth it, and, man, we got it down. 19 Arab hijackers did that crap. And it gets even worse with the Pentagon and Shanksville, Flight 93. And we're going to cover that in the second hour, or the second program, rather, because we've already run almost an hour and a half. And so, again, Herb, with all I've prattled on about, and though that may not be necessarily your purview, any final comments?
Just that, again, I think we've covered that the official theory is impossible. I really would like to recommend David Ray Griffin's book on the mysterious collapse of Building 7.
Okay.
I'm with Griffin up to a point, but I find Griffin to be one of the, for certain, his approach to science and his approach to law, there's a lot of practical things you can get from David Ray Griffin. He has a good turn of a phrase, and I really like his mysterious collapse of Building 7, not just for the collapse of Building 7, but just for how he shows how NIST is unscientific. I guess I would remind other people that all NIST was NIST was the government experts. That's all they were. If you were to trial, you got experts on this side, you got experts on the other side, and NIST were not independent investigators, but they were just the government experts telling the government story, and you just have to view that in that light. And if you see the little propaganda clips, when you see little bits when you see about NIST, like from like a guy like Alexander Colburn or any of the other defenders of the official theory, they like to use little phrases like NIST investigators determined this or they determined that, when what they really did was speculated this or claimed that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the point Griffin makes. And like I said, I've learned a lot from David Ray Griffin, and I think his book on Building 7, especially when he deals with the science and how NIST is unscientific, I think it's really helpful. And I think maybe listeners could get a lot out of it. I don't necessarily go with the whole thermite thing, but his treatment on how the NIST report on Building 7 is really very good, and I'd recommend that, and some of the links we have on our site, especially Dave 9/11 Blimp and 9/11 University, and also the site we'll put up on the German Engineers Help the USA is a pretty good site to go to too, especially the collapse scheme of WTC 1 and WTC 2, which is the whole shebang about this pile driving that the upper portions were just driving through the lower portions of the building is covered there, and you can just look at a picture and you can see that's not happening. And it's really not that complicated once you see I've been arguing with the shills on the boards, and once you know how they work, and it's like you said, they end up telling you what you're seeing isn't what you're seeing.
Right. Yeah, I know. They tell you
just look
clearly
at the videos
you can
and
see.
the pictures.
Right. And you bring up one last point. And of course, I was remiss in not bringing this up. And that is, and I didn't rip this audio, I lost it, but Rudy Giuliani beating his ass at a WTC 7 saying it's going to collapse before any of the towers collapsed.
And that was Rudy Giuliani, of course, Times Magazine of the Year. Time Magazine's Man of the Year for the great job he did down there.
Yeah. And they put a mic in front of his face and they said, "Why are you leaving?" "Well, the towers might collapse." And 1 and 2 hadn't dropped yet. And I wish I had that audio to document that, but I don't have it. But, I mean, you're aware of that whole situation as well, right? With Rudy beating it out of there before the shit hit the fan.
Yeah.
All right. There you go, folks. Check it out for yourself. And listen, you believe what you want to believe, but, you know, wake up. I mean, it is what it is. It's not pretty, but if you want to know the truth, there it is. And the United States government, and it's not unlike a lot of others, are not at all, in any way, shape, or form, indifferent to killing its own citizenry to advance something else. What's the point? Here we are, what? 9, almost 10 years later, still in Southwest Asia. And we're not coming out, folks, no matter what Obama says or anyone else. This was a triggering event, much like the Lusitania for World War I, much like Pearl Harbor for World War II. Well, we got this, obviously, justification for World War III. All right, that's my extrapolation. I understand it, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Herb Smith from Uticans for 9/11 Truth will put up the websites for their blog, also with the other links we talked about. If you're interested, if you really want to know, fine. If you want to hide with the regular media, God bless you, because the worst is yet to come, man, because they're going to absolutely bring you down a road you don't want to go. The worst, I'm sorry to say, is yet to come. But anyway, Herb, thanks a lot for this late hour and for you, forgiving me for being late on this whole recording. I thank you for coming on, and I'll ask you if it's okay if in program 2 that we start to deal with the Pentagon and the mystery hole in Shanksville.
Okay, sounds good. If you can give me a couple of weeks on that, and I'll keep in touch. And I'm just finishing up some Pentagon stuff, which was always the one I had the hardest with. But I pretty much took me a while to get a handle on that one. All right,
Herb, stay with us if you can, folks. This has been Think or Be Eaten. If any of you who are really earnest about the situation want to ask questions or get more information, you can email me, okay, at Vyzygoth. That's a corrupted spelling of Vyzygoth. It's VYZYGOTH @hotmail.com. And I'll correspond with you. I'll give you whatever you want. But, don't bust my balls. I'm not interested. I'm too freaking old for this and too long in the tooth about this whole thing. So that's the way it goes. So, Herb, stay with us. Folks, you've been listening to Think or Be Eaten. We'll come out with part 2 for 101 for 9/11.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does nothing.
That was Frank DiMartini, World Trade Center Construction Project Manager.